Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming out, staying up after lunch, staying a little bit awake, and listening to what I'd like to think is one of the most important aspects of cryptocurrency, one that's been neglected over many of the years of crypto adoption, and one that I think has some nuance as to why it is important, which is self-custody. So a lot of people here hold your keys, not your crypto, but the real question is the why. There's one thing that people hear a lot about with respect to the why, which is the security. It's like, don't leave your money with a third party, exchanges get hacked, you may lose your funds. But I'd like to talk about every other why. Things you don't generally hear about, and things that really determine whether or not Bitcoin will be successful or fail. And I think it all is actually rooted in self-custody. A lot of it needs self-custody. But to ask that question, we have to ask, what does it even mean for Bitcoin to succeed at all? What do people want out of it? I remember the early days, you go to a crypto conference, Bitcoin conference, and everyone was kind of happy-go-lucky. Everyone wanted the same thing. You had a bunch of anarchists, some technologists, cypherpunks, and for the most part, they agreed. But as the industry expands, people start to see different nuggets of what Bitcoin can bring, and they gravitate to those different pieces of its functionality, of its feature set. What it can handle, what it can do that other forms of digital currency or even regular currency could not do. So one thing that we hear a lot about, and you go to, hey, what is Bitcoin and why is it special, is that it provides global accessibility. Think about it for a second. Any form of digital value that you've ever sent between one person and another, digital money, because Bitcoin's not the first digital money, the dollar is already digital, but every time you've sent it, you've never had full global accessibility. You could never send it from one place to another, any border, so long as the sender and the recipient have an internet connection. You couldn't do that. And with Bitcoin, you can. That's definitely a big nugget that a lot of people talk about, and one that I know I personally care about, and we try to achieve with what we build, and we are excited about other projects that try to achieve the same thing. Number two is privacy, and this one is tricky. You know, a lot of people just don't really care about privacy. We're on social media, we share everything about our life. And for the most part, crypto improves privacy, Bitcoin improves privacy, but in some ways it makes it a little bit worse. And if you're just here because I just want Bitcoin to go up, well, then privacy probably isn't the most important thing to you. But it's definitely what a lot of people talked about when Bitcoin first came on the scene. The fact that we can now send a digital transaction, and by not having a counterparty, there isn't a counterparty that knows who I am, and there isn't someone that knows who's receiving the money. Censorship resistance. This is probably one of the biggest things you hear about all the time. This is one of the big battles between the different blockchains. Are you censorship resistant? Oh, you've got only a few nodes, or your nodes are only in these certain countries, and the government can censor you, and now you're not going to be able to donate to WikiLeaks. This one's talked about and also resonates with me as well. Fundamentally, if we don't have this, then you lose a really, really big portion of the demographic that fundamentally cares not so much about the price, but just simply being able to access a lot of the people and entities and companies, organizations that need to receive money, but can be blocked off. And WikiLeaks is obviously a pretty clear example of that. And then last is one that many people don't think about with respect to self-custody, but they do think about with respect to Bitcoin, is inflation resistance. And with Bitcoin, we know the inflation schedule. It's pretty well known. We're about to come into another halvening. People think it's going to be the big thing to introduce a supply shock and increase the price, but we know there's going to be 21 million coins. That's not inherent to cryptocurrency. You can make a cryptocurrency that has a ton of coins and inflates crazy every year, but it happens to be inherent into most. And there isn't a generally single entity that can change that. But how does this all correlate to self-custody? So let's kind of rewind back to the first slide. Self-custody. Without self-custody, as soon as you hold funds with a counterparty, that counterparty will, if not already, will be required to determine whether or not you are sending funds across the border to a country that the government you're at doesn't like. In the early days of Bitcoin, global accessibility was actually very good, even in fully custodial solutions. You can go from an exchange, whether it be Coinbase or Kraken, Bitstamp, and pretty much send it to any public address anywhere in the world. But now we're seeing both KYCing of the source address and soon to be had KYCing of where you're sending the money and asking why are you sending the money. Blacklisting of various public addresses on the network on various different cryptocurrencies. It's not easy and it's not foolproof coming from the government's point of view, but they are doing it. And it is introducing the friction that the legacy financial system has always had, and now it's introducing the same thing right back into crypto. Privacy. I mentioned this one was a bit tricky. With many self-custody solutions, wallets, even self-custody DEXs, exchanges, you might actually have the exact same privacy as you would have with a full custodian. If they ask for all of your information and all of your transactions go through your provider, then there's not really much of an improvement. But guaranteed if you have a custodian, you've lost your privacy because every transaction has to go through them. They're signing with your keys. They know what addresses you're sending to, and they know how much you're sending, when you're sending it. Self-custody is your only hope. It's not a guarantee. It doesn't guarantee that you've got good privacy, but that is your best hope. And to improve on that, you want not even just self-custody, but a solution that actually connects to the network directly. It doesn't go through your provider. It might go through a handful of nodes, random nodes, various different APIs. But that is definitely your best hope, is self-custody. You're completely lost on the privacy front as soon as you've hosted your keys with somebody else. Censorship resistance, not a whole lot different from global accessibility, except that you don't even have to cross a border. I could be censored sending Bitcoin from my phone to someone standing 3 feet away from me if one of us or another person is doing that from a custodial solution. Send it to your exchange account, they receive it, and they go, where'd this money come from? That's censorship. And it's not a theoretical threat, it's actually already happening today. And if you think about it, many people, there's probably more people in here than want to admit, hold a vast majority of their wealth on a custodial solution. But we've got this conference, which has probably got hundreds of people coming to it. There's probably one tomorrow, and the next day, 365 days a year, I'm willing to bet there is some either meetup or a conference event that is happening on cryptocurrency. Would that be happening if crypto always needed a custodian? Even if it had, some of the properties of inflation resistance. If it was gold, if it was a gold-backed token, we've had that for decades. It didn't create the type of interest that Bitcoin has garnered over the world. So why are you here then? If that's all you kind of care about, if that's how you want to store your funds. And the last thing, inflation resistance. This is one that people go, well, what does it have anything to do with me holding my keys? There's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin, right? Who cares if the Bitcoin's on an exchange or if it's on a hardware device or it's on my phone? And this one is really nuanced, but I think it's one of the most important facets of self-custody. Let's rewind a little bit and talk about money as a whole. Every money before Bitcoin had 2 payment methods. It had the physical air between you and the person you wanted to pay. I stand here, you stand there, I just physically give it to you. That's its inherent payment method of shells, gold, silver, tulips. And then it had one other payment method, which is let's put our money with a custodian and then they tell us who has what balance. That works for every physical type of payment method. And that does allow us to transfer value through that custodian. We did that because it's more efficient. It's a more efficient payment method. It sucks to wheelbarrow a bunch of shells or to lug gold around or even slice gold into a tiny sliver so that I can pay for a cup of coffee. Easier to put it with a custodian and have them just write down something on a piece of paper. But what happened when we optimized gold? We optimized it by saying, let's put it with a custodian and issue paper against it. And that paper is backed, or that gold is backed by paper with some ratio that was, in theory, to be fixed. But the problem is the payment method became very, very powerful. It became very useful and very widely adopted. And with that adoption, the payment method became more valuable than the underlying currency or asset underneath it. And it gave the entities that issued the paper the power to withdraw the asset from underneath it. Because we were just constantly pushing paper around between each other. Did we ever actually pull out the gold from underneath? And so once you're dependent on the payment method, you become less dependent on the asset. This actually incites one of the hot debates in Bitcoin, which is it a store of value or is it a payment method? And I'll stand here on stage and say, if you think it's a store of value and that's it, bullshit. It is not just a store of value. We've had store of value, we've had gold. It's its unique property as a payment method without a counterparty that's digital, that can go anywhere in the world, that makes it inherently unique. And if you lose that, and you rely on someone else as the payment method, then how much gold actually is underneath the dollar? And therefore, how much Bitcoin is actually underneath that exchange or that hosted wallet? You don't really know. It's really hard to prove. And after a while, many people will think it won't really matter as long as I can receive my salary and I can pay for the cup of coffee or pay for a house with that currency, even though it's potentially no longer 21 million issued IOUs of Bitcoin, but it becomes 22, 23, and then 1 billion. So rewinding again, if you're in it for the 6-month buy and Bitcoin go up, then yeah, none of this really matters. But I'd like to think a larger portion of the audience actually is in it for one of these properties. And I'm willing to wager that every single one of these properties is fully gone if we lose self-custody, or at least a vast majority of people with Bitcoin actually using self-custody. It is a little bit harder, it's a little bit different, but I think it's important enough that I stand on stage here and Mo lets me talk about this stuff, to all of you people here. So, enter slight chill mode. What are we doing at our company Edge to make self-custody a little bit easier for people? So we found that while there's many self-custody solutions, wallets and whatnot, most people right now, we're in a speculative world, want to buy, sell, and trade it. And there's this distinct difference or separation between holding and then buying, selling, and trading. So we've kind of merged the two. A self-custody exchange. Mobile app that both implements very simplified key management. You get to own those 12, 24 words, but you never have to see them. You just create what looks like an account and your keys are automatically encrypted and backed up. Fiat on-ramps. We've partnered with almost a dozen different fiat on-ramp exchanges from around the world. So while we're a US-based company, we can service the world to get into crypto through our partners. And is anyone here based out of Europe or has family in Europe? Everybody? We're all US here? One of our partners out of Europe actually lets you buy up to 5K of Bitcoin per day with no KYC at all. By playing the software game, we leave a lot of the regulatory burden to our partners, and also we're able to select some of the best in class to give these great exchange services. And then, of course, crypto-to-crypto exchange. There's many different assets. We're all still kind of betting on which one will win for the different use cases. And it will automatically find you the best price across 8 different crypto-to-crypto exchanges for a swap, all while holding your own keys. And some of those exchanges are actually even decentralized exchanges that never see your money, all through smart contracts. And there's a quick list of the assets we support and roughly what our app looks like. Get it on iOS and Android, download it, give it a try, and let us know what you think. But more importantly, whether you're using Edge or using something else, once again, just hold your keys, hold your funds, and make sure that Bitcoin and crypto as a whole does succeed. And I think that this is fundamentally important to get there. Thanks a lot, everybody.